Hey guys, Johnny here, and this video we are going to be focusing mainly on timelines in the Flash from anywhere from the beginning of the season of the show to what it is at now. We're basically going to talk about first of all, we're going to talk about the original timeline, which is the timeline before anything was altered. Then we're going to kick it off by starting from the beginning, which is where, the Reverse Flash alters the timeline and then so on and so forth. So that's what this video is going to be about. Hopefully you guys like it. If you do, give me a like and a subscription, and I'll bring out some more videos like this. Okay, so we know from the show that the first person to ever alter the timeline was Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash. And when he altered the timeline, it was at the point in which he went back in time to attempt to kill Barry Allen as a kid to stop him from becoming the Flash in the future, and therefore stopping him from becoming his arch nemesis. So in the show, they briefly get into, what time travel is and, what effects it can have on the timeline and stuff like that. They do mention a few of the paradoxes, which we'll get into. However, I just wanted to state that when you time travel, there are ramifications for it, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. Whether you travel for, an hour into the past or a day or a week, it doesn't matter. Every time you do it, there's ramifications. You never know exactly what those ramifications are until, you let time just go by, and then you start to realize what changes have occurred to the timeline. So just keep that in mind. Every time any speedster, not just Barry, every time any speedster time travels for however long, they are altering the timeline and they are creating ramifications to their timeline. Alright, so before I actually get into breaking down every time that the timeline has been changed in The Flash, I just want to start off by kind of giving you guys a demographic of what it looks like every time that you do go back in time and change the timeline. So I want you guys to look at the 3 years that I have on here. So the first one is 1989, which is the year that, according to the records or the math, that would be the year that Barry Allen is born, 1989. He's 11 years old in the year 2000, so he should be born in 1989, if not 1990, but we're just going to leave it at 1989. The third year on there is 2024, which is the year that Eobard Thawne traveled from to get to the year 2000, which is the year that which is the time travel where he ended up killing Barry's mother in an attempt to kill Barry as a kid. So basically what ends up happening when you go back in time and alter the past is everything that happened up until the point in which you traveled to. So basically anything that happened before to the year 2000, that night that Eobard traveled back to kill Barry, ended up killing Barry's mom. Everything that happened before that happens the way that it normally did in the original timeline, where Barry was born in 1989. His parents, I don't know, moved into that house. All that stuff happened the way it was supposed to happen. The only things that change the only things that are altered in that timeline are after that moment. So if you see that arrow that's going up into the time travel, it says time travel on it, and then it goes and breaks that timeline 1 down into timeline 2. What that's basically saying is that now the timeline is no longer focused on timeline 1 because that timeline has been erased. It no longer exists since the timeline has been altered. Now what happens is that it goes from 1989 to the year 2000, but it drops down here to show that this is timeline 2, the little arrow for timeline 2, that's the one that we're on now. So this isn't the original timeline. The original timeline would be where Barry's mother never gets killed by Eobard Thawne. That's the original timeline. So the timeline that the show starts on is already an alternate timeline. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that whenever you alter the timeline, the only things that get altered are anything in between the time that you traveled back to. So in Eobard Thawne's instance, nothing before 2000, the year 2000 changes. Everything after the year 2000 is what changes because that's the time span in which he altered the timeline. So, super briefly, I just want to talk about two of the time travel paradoxes that we've been introduced to in The Flash. The first one is called the causal loop paradox, also known as the predestination paradox. So, basically, what a causal loop is it's a future event that was a cause of a past event, which in turn is the cause of that future event. So both of those events exist in the space-time continuum, but their origin cannot be determined. You don't know which one happened before the other. So it's kind of complicated, but the best way that I can explain this is in season 2, episode 17, Flashback, when Barry travels back in time to talk to Earbot Dawn about the speed equation, which we'll actually get into later in this video. Towards the end, when the original Flash from that timeline or from that point in the timeline finds out that goes back to Star Labs, and they all start talking about, why is there two Flashes, and they start talking about time travel, and then Cisco says, so the emblem on the white on the emblem, is that if I change the white or the emblem to the white, is that going to be because I saw it here first, or is it going to be because I had the idea to do it? So basically what he's asking is was he originally going to do that anyways, or is he only going to do it now because he saw the future Barry with the white emblem? So I know that it can get a little confusing with these paradoxes, but basically that's a brief description of what this paradox is. And Cisco kind of explains it pretty well. Will he change the emblem because of this, or will he already change the emblem anyways? And we know from watching the entire, season 2 episode, or season 2 up until that point, that he does in fact change the emblem before that even happened. So in that, see, this is where the timeline altercations come in. When Barry traveled back in time all the way back to season 1, because he did travel like a year, he inevitably put himself in a situation where now the emblem, the white on the emblem, is going to be changed because Cisco saw it on future Barry, not because he came up with the idea. But you can't, there's no real way of determining if that's the cause, but as far as the show is concerned, I think that is the cause, because we see that Cisco does come out with the new white emblem towards like the beginning of the season. So since Barry altered the timeline by going back to talk to Thawne about the speed equation in the first place, now the event that happened where Cisco just came up with the idea for the white emblem is now, it doesn't exist anymore. It's part of a deleted timeline. So that's what this whole thing about time travel is. There's ramifications for it every time that you do it, and you don't know what those things are until you actually get back and start letting time settle, and then you start to slowly figure it out. This is one of those things. Now, I personally believe that Cisco is gonna change the emblem because he got the idea, but because he saw the future Barry with it. So that's another one of the ramifications of Barry time traveling in the first place. So the second time travel paradox is known as the grandfather paradox. And the grandfather paradox means that it's basically when the past is changed in any way, it creates a contradiction, like a disruption in the space-time continuum. So anytime that a time traveler speedster goes back in time, they have to do exactly what happened originally in the timeline. Otherwise, there's a disruption in the space-time continuum. Basically, any speedster that goes back in time is already affecting the timeline with a grandfather paradox, because when you go back in time, you're going back to change something. You don't just travel back in time unless it's an accident, which, it happened to Barry. So we know that it can happen the first time or second time. But as far as time travel is concerned, anytime a speedster time travels, it's to change the past, something in the past, or a lot of things in the past. So the grandfather paradox is very common in The Flash, and we've seen it multiple times throughout the seasons. Alright, now that we got that stuff out of the way, let's actually get to the good stuff. about how many times, or not how many times, but what times have we seen Barry Allen time travel and alter the timeline? And we're gonna talk about them in order, as they've happened from season 1 to season 3. So let's get started with the first one. So, like I said before, the timeline that the show starts on in episode 1, season 1, episode 1, is not the original timeline. What we're starting the show on is already an alternate timeline. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you guys what the original event in the original timeline would be had Eobard aka the Reverse Flash, not traveled back in time and killed Barry Allen's mom, Nora Allen. Alright, so in the original timeline of events, nothing happens in the year 2000 and nothing happens in the year 2015. The closest event of importance is in 2020, which is when Harrison Wells and his wife turn on the particle accelerator. We know this because in season 1, we can see that before Eobard kills Harrison Wells and had already killed his wife, he tells him that in the future he turns on the particle accelerator in the year 2020. So from that we can assume that either at that same instance when the particle accelerator went on and had a malfunction, that's when Barry got hit by the lightning bolt or some form of lightning to give him his speed. We don't know if in this original timeline of events he ended up getting it, going into a coma or not. They never really talk about it, or at least not yet. But we do know that in the year 2020 is when Barry Allen got his speed. We also know that, from the article in season 1 that we see Eobard looking at all the time, that in the year 2024, an article of the Flash missing in a red cloud of smoke, it surfaces. So that's an important event in that original timeline. And actually, it's an important event in every timeline since then. After after all the the timelines have been altered all those times, that article is still there. So that's actually an important event. We might want to keep an eye on it. The next important event is in the year 2151. I know the one is kind of, it looks kind of weird because I messed up. I put 2051, but it's supposed to be 2151. So in the year 2151, Eobard is born to, I don't know who, but someone in the Thawne family. And that just means that even in the year 2151, Eobard is just a baby. I mean, he was just barely born. So it would take him, I don't know, give or take 20 years, 20 plus years to grow up, become a physicist, and recreate the effects of the particle accelerator to give himself speed in order to become the Flash, which is what he's always wanted. He even told Barry that he was obsessed with becoming like the Flash and becoming the Flash eventually. And that's when he recreated the particle accelerator explosion that gave Barry his speed in the first place. So that's the events that happened in the original timeline before anything was altered, just the way that things normally happened. Okay, so since that was the original timeline of events that were supposed to happen before anything was altered in the timeline, we're going to refer to that as the original Flash timeline. Anything else after that will be, I will refer to them as alternate timeline 1 and so on and so forth. So let's get started with talking about the first time that the timeline was altered, and that would be when the Reverse Flash, aka Barthon, went back in time to attempt to kill Barry Allen as a kid. So, in August of the year 2000, Eobard had traveled back to the past. From the year 2024, he traveled back to the year 2000 in an attempt to kill Barry as a kid. Therefore, there would be no future, or Barry would cease to have a future, so there would be no Flash in the future. Therefore, Eobard could become the Flash, which is what he's always wanted. However, his plan didn't go according to the way he wanted it to, because future Flash, aka future Barry Allen, followed him from the year 2024 back to the year 2000 and got his younger self, the kid Barry, out of the house before Eobard could kill him. So Eobard best way to stop Barry from becoming the Flash, either way, was to kill Nora Allen, and therefore the loss would be too tragic for him to get over it, and that would inevitably stop him from becoming the Flash in the future. All right, so I have here a little diagram so I can show you guys exactly what happened that night. So in the red, you can see that that's the original Flash timeline, which is what I was talking about earlier. All the events that I mentioned earlier, that's the original Flash timeline. In the blue, you can see that that's the alternate Flash timeline, also known in the diagram, it'll be known as timeline 2. We're going to call it alternate timeline 1. Okay? So when Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, traveled back in time from the year 2024 to the year 2000, killing Nora Allen. Therefore, if you can see that little arrow that goes down from the year 2000 going down, that's the part in which the timeline was altered, therefore creating an alternate timeline. And like I said before, anything that happened before that night happened the way it was supposed to happen. Anything happening after that night is now part of an alternate timeline in which things aren't going to happen the way that they normally happen in the original timeline. All right, so let's take a look at some of the most more important altered events in the timeline since, Eobard Thawne killed Nora Allen and altered the entire timeline. First thing that comes up is in the year 2000, that same night when Nora Allen gets killed, Henry Allen gets, arrested, and eventually he goes to prison for murder since he was the only one in the house, and I'm assuming they found prints on the knife. And we know from the show that Henry Allen and Joe West were actually really good friends. At the time, Joe West was only a police officer. He wasn't a detective yet, but they were good enough friends, and Henry trusted Joe enough to leave Barry in his custody with the hopes that he would eventually get out of prison. The next thing that ends up happening... Barry would go live with Joe West after the events of that night when Barry's mom got killed. The next important thing that happens is early 2014, Barry becomes a CSI for the CCPD. I'm assuming that Joe put in a word for him with Captain Singh. I'm not sure. They never really mention it, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that that's what happened. So that's when Barry becomes a CSI for CCPD. The next important thing that happens is actually interesting because this happens before the Flash even had a show. This is before the Flash even had its own show. It was in the process of being produced, but it didn't have its own show yet. The show hadn't started yet. The next thing that happens is that Barry actually gets to meet Team Arrow, and that happens in Season 2, Episode 8, called The Scientist. It's when Barry goes from Central City to Star City to investigate the attack on the facility where they took the centrifuge and all. And this is when we first meet Barry Allen, but he didn't have his speed yet. Like I said, this was before the Flash even started its show. So that's when we first meet Barry Allen. That was the next event that happened, and that actually didn't happen in the original timeline. The next important thing that happens is that early 2015, I want to say like 2 or 3 days after Barry actually gets back from Star City after meeting Team Arrow, he is the particle accelerator goes online, and then it has a malfunction, which ends up creating that cloud of dark matter that affected a lot of people in Central City, creating some of them into metahumans. So that's the same, like 2 days after that's the same night that Barry got his speed through the particle accelerator, which is a very important event as far as the timeline goes. One little side note that I want to make is just real quick. The particle accelerator went off. In this first alternate timeline, it went off in 2015. And in the original timeline, the particle accelerator didn't go online until the year 2020. So in this timeline, in this alternate timeline, Barry Allen gets his speed 5 years before he was supposed to originally get his speed. So just keep that in mind. It's not the same as the original timeline. In the original timeline, he didn't get his speed until the year 2020. So after that, the next sort of important event that does happen in this alternate timeline is that in the year 2024, the article that says that the Flash is disappeared surfaces. So that's probably the one thing that we see throughout season 1 is where Eobard Thawne is just constantly keeping track of that article, making sure that in the year 2024 there is no longer going to be a Flash, so that later on in the future he can become the Flash. So all of these different events that are happening at different times and at different points in time, or completely different at all, are all basically ramifications of Eobard Thawne traveling to the year 2000 and killing Nora Allen, therefore creating a time paradox which drags itself throughout the future, and it, as you can see, has now changed a lot of the events that were not supposed to happen in the way that they are happening, if compared to what I showed you guys in the original Flash timeline. Alright, so the first time that Barry Allen altered the timeline was in Season 1, Episode 15, titled Out of Time, and it drags out to Season 1, Episode 16, titled Rogue Time. And the reason he actually went back in time was actually an accident. This was, I don't know if you guys remember, but if you don't, this was at the same time that one of the Martin brothers was trying to avenge his brother's death. Or not avenge, get revenge for his brother's death. He had Joe hostage, created a big, huge tidal wave that was about to crush Central City into oblivion. So Barry was running back and forth on the coast of Central City, trying to create enough momentum to stop the tidal wave from hitting Central City. In doing so, he was running so fast that he ended up running back in time. And it was an accident, but he did end up running back in time. It wasn't very much. It was only about a day or so, but he did, in fact, alter the timeline at that point. And I'm going to show you guys a little demographic. Alright, so let's get to the part where I explain this. So, the alternate timeline 1 is going to represent the timeline that we were on before Barry accidentally time traveled, a day back. So, him kissing Iris, Joe getting abducted by Martin creating the tidal wave, Cisco getting killed by Wells after he figured out that he was the Reverse Flash. All of that is part of alternate timeline 1. Alternate timeline 2 would be when Barry time jumps. He heads to the morgue. He already knows what's going to happen, so he goes and captures Martin before he can do anything, create the tidal wave, and abduct Joe. Also, that would mean that he never kissed Iris in this timeline. And Cisco never gets killed by Wells because he didn't find out that he was the Reverse Flash. All of those things are now part of alternate timeline 2. So, let's just clear something up real quick. The moment that Barry time traveled a day into the past, he inevitably deleted alternate timeline number 1. Anything that already happened in that timeline has been deleted. It's become a deleted timeline. Because now what we're living, or what the show is living, is going to be in alternate timeline 2. Okay, so the second time that Barry alters the timeline happens in a crossover event between The Flash and Arrow. It starts off with The Flash in Season 2, Episode 8, titled Legends of Today, and it continues in Arrow, Season 2, Episode 8, titled Legends of Yesterday. Basically, what happens in this episode is they're trying to take down a guy named Vandal Savage, who's supposed to be this immortal guy. I'm not going to get too into detail with it. If you want to know more about this story arc with Vandal Savage and everything, go ahead and go check out Legends of Tomorrow, and you'll get all the information that you need. Basically, the reason that Barry time travels this time is actually it's an accident. Vandal Savage uses this staff it creates like an energy blast that destroys everything in its path, literally kills Oliver's team, Barry's team, kills everyone, and Barry's trying to run away from it, and as he's running away from it, he accidentally time travels. And he went back in time about a day or so before that happened. So he did in fact alter the timeline by doing this. It was an accident, but again, he did alter the timeline when he did this. So similar to what happened in the last diagram that I showed you guys, the first arrow is showing alternate timeline number 2, which is where we were at. The moment in time that Barry went back and traveled in a day in the past, when he did that, he inevitably deleted alternate timeline number 2 and created alternate timeline number 3. Anything that happened in alternate timeline number 2 is now been erased because it's part of a deleted timeline. So from that point, from the point that he traveled back to, from that point on, that would be alternate timeline number 3. Alright, so the next time that Barry Allen travels back in time and alters the timeline happens in Season 2, Episode 17, titled Flashback. In this episode, he needs to get faster in order to defeat Zoom before Zoom gets a chance to steal his speed. And he can't seem to find a solution to the speed equation in order to get faster without using V9. So his best solution is to travel back in time a whole year and talk to the one person he knows who's already solved the speed equation. Also, Eobard Thawne is the only other person we know of so far that has solved the speed equation. So he has to go back in time a whole year. So from the point in time that he travels is Season 2, Episode 17. He travels all the way back to the event of Season 1, Episode 11, titled The Sound and the Fury. And from that episode, from Season 1, Episode 11, is the point in time in which the timeline begins a new alternate timeline. So anything before Season 1, Episode 11 is going to remain the same. Anything after Season 1, Episode 11 has now been altered and is a part of alternate timeline number 4. Which means that alternate timeline number 3 is now a deleted timeline. So the next time that Barry Allen travels back in time and alters the timeline happens in Season 2, Episode 23, titled The Race of His Life. Barry finally ends up defeating Zoom at the end of Episode 23, but still feels a big hole inside of him because he just lost his dad after just recently accepting the passing of his mother. Without not being able to take it anymore, take the pain, he travels back in time 15 years into the past to the night that his mom was killed by the Reverse Flash, and he stops the Reverse Flash from ever killing his mother, therefore altering the entire timeline, creating the alternate timeline known as Flashpoint. So when Barry went back in time to the year 2000 and stopped the Reverse Flash from killing his mom, he inevitably created alternate timeline number 5, which we can refer to as Flashpoint since that's what it's called in the show. So by saving his mom and stopping the Reverse Flash, he created Flashpoint. And when he created Flashpoint, he ended up deleting alternate timeline number 4, which is the timeline that we were on, or that the show was on, when he defeated Zoom. When he defeated Zoom, that was part of alternate timeline number 4. So, in going back and creating Flashpoint, he deleted alternate timeline number 4. So now anything that happens would take place in alternate timeline number 5, aka Flashpoint. The next time that the timeline gets altered is in Season 3, Episode 1, titled Flashpoint, which is when, after Barry has been in Flashpoint, living there for 3 months or so, he starts to lose memories of Cisco and Caitlin and Star Labs and his past timeline life. Eventually, he even loses his speed, his ability to harness the Speed Force, because he got his speed in the alternate timeline that was deleted the moment he created Flashpoint. So in doing so and staying in Flashpoint for so long, he ended up losing his speed. So he went back to Eobard Thawne and told him that he needed him to go back to that night and kill his mom in order to set the timeline straight. In the show, they make it sound like, he did in fact reset the timeline and reset things to the way they were, but in fact he did not. What he really just did was create another alternate timeline. So what Eobard Thawne essentially did was just create alternate timeline number 6. He ended up deleting the Flashpoint timeline, aka alternate timeline number 5, and then created alternate timeline number 6, which is where Season 3 takes place in alternate timeline number 6. Anything after Season 3 Episode 1 takes place in alternate timeline number 6. Alright, guys, that's actually gonna do it for this video. Sorry about it being so long, but like I said in my past videos, I like to get into detail. I like to get very specific so you guys can all understand. I know there's different type of people out there who understand differently. That's why I did the whole thing with the diagrams. And then I used a few of the pictures, screenshots from the actual episodes to see if you guys could get a better understanding of it. Hopefully you guys did. If you didn't, please leave your questions or comments in the comment section, and I would be more than glad to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again for watching. And if you like what you see and you want to see some more videos like this, just give me a like and a subscription, and I'll get out some more videos for you guys.